Hi, day 4 of distance learning, everybody. Just to kind of recap where we left off last lesson, we talked about errors of meiosis and possible mistakes that can occur. Today, we're going to look at if those mistakes happen with sex chromosomes as promised. So just to kind of recap some of that, I'll go through that in the beginning with you. All right, so by the end of today's lessons, you should be able to explain how non-disjunction occurs. And remember, that's really that idea that those homologous chromosomes or those sister chromosomes don't separate properly, so they're not distributed properly in the gametes. We're also going to talk about one possible outcome of non-disjunction, what can occur if it is a viable error. So again, to recap, non-disjunction is when those chromosomes do not separate properly. So we either get a gamete, a sex cell, sperm, or egg that has too much DNA or too little DNA. And I included what happens when we have the breakage of chromosomes at the bottom, deletions, duplication, inversion, and translocations. We're not going to get into those today, but I'm giving you kind of a preview of what we're going to talk about next week so that you have an idea that we are going to talk about mutations and some other chromosomal abnormalities. All right, so again, non-disjunction, chromosomes or sister chromatids didn't separate properly, right? So we can have two potential outcomes. One would be a trisomy, which means instead of 2 of the same chromosomes, we end up having 3 of the same chromosomes. The other one is monosomy, right? And so that just means we have 1 of the chromosomes when we really actually needed 2. Okay, and remember that that N in that image represents the number that a chromosome should have for 100% of the DNA. So what are some things that can happen if the sex chromosomes don't separate properly? So we can have a few different disorders. The first we're going to talk about is XXY or Klinefelter syndrome. Then we're going to talk about trisomy X, which is a female that's going to have 3 X's. We'll talk about Jacob syndrome, which is XYY, and you're like, what? How does that happen? We'll talk about that, and we'll also talk about Turner's. So getting into Klinefelter's, it's XXY. Basically what happens is the X's don't separate properly. You can be a totally fine person, normal intelligence, tall. Typically we see that it affects testosterone production. So we have lower testosterone production, and usually that means that they're sterile. And I included, just to kind of go back to karyotypes that we talked about last week, I included a picture of a karyotype with somebody that had Klinefelter syndrome. So that's what it would look like. You can see there's significantly more X's and there's still 1 Y. All right, talking about Jacob syndrome, this is XYY. Now this is weird because remember, females have 2 X's, males have an X and a Y. So if you're like, how the heck did 2 Ys get there? Basically what happens is somewhere when that sperm was being produced, an extra Y got copied. And so they're slightly taller than average. There's some delayed emotional maturity there and some other things, but pretty much normal. Trisomy X, basically 3 X's. So one, either sperm or egg had 2 X's and the other one had 1. Healthy females, I mean, that's kind of a good thing, right? It's not going to be a huge disadvantage. Turner syndrome is just 1 X or XO, meaning that there's not another chromosome. So this is a monosomy, right? There are significant health issues here because there's not enough information. So typically you're going to see a female and you're going to get that. All right, so a few things to check for yourself. Check to see if you know those 3 things: purpose and outcome of meiosis. Can you use the vocab to explain this process? Can you define non-disjunction? All right, work on your project, get your project done. Take the cactus check. Watch the video. If the cactus check that you're watching doesn't make sense, watch a video that I have breaking down the question because I want you to do well. I know you're going to rock it. You're going to be awesome. Take a minute, take a deep breath, and as always, be safe, be smart.